for being a little bit late. We are still waiting for a couple of persons to connect, and we will be starting in about 5 minutes. Sorry for this. Okay, thank you. Okay, so I think we are ready to start the opening ceremony. So welcome everyone to the 20th annual conference of the European Society of Criminology. My name is Andra Trandafir, and some of you know me as the local organizer of the Bucharest conference, which, rest assured, I will remain. And we really hope that we get to see you in Bucharest next year. But as all the preparation for the regular conference in Bucharest were already done, the ESC board trusted me with the organization of the online conference as well. So this is why you are seeing me here, and you will be seeing me next year. So I am particularly happy to welcome you to this year atypical event. And since it is an atypical event, I will make an atypical introduction. Normally, the local organizer was giving a very insightful speech about crime and criminology in their country, which I won't be able to do because I want to keep that for the Bucharest conference. So instead of doing that, in my very, very short opening, I will just say some very kind thank you to a few people. I won't be able to tell the thank you part in the closing of the ceremony, because in the closing of the ceremony, I apparently need to pass the flag to myself as the organizer for next year's conference. So I will be very short, but I really feel the need to say these words. First of all, thank you very much to all the members of the ESC board. They were very helpful for the past months, I think at least 3 months. Part of the board met with me every week to assist me with the organization of the conference, and that was particularly important because, of course, I knew nothing about organizing such an event. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, especially Leslie, who was chairing the board, for all the help. I will miss the Thursday evening meetings. I also need to say thank you to Levan Pauls, the organizer of EUROCRIM 2019, because he was answering all my emails with all the questions and giving me all the information I needed. Also, thank you to the Secretary of the European Society for Criminology. It was not an easy work to organize this, and thank you for all the support. And of course, thank you to all the chairs of the working groups who were very, very kind and accepted our invitation to help with the organization, with the conference. They practically drafted the program, and they were very helpful. And thank you for all the cooperation. It went really, really great. I will just have 2 more minutes, but I really feel the need to help to all the team at my faculty, the Faculty of Law of the University of Bucharest, because they were amazing. So the dean and the vice deans, and also the students. We have 60 students who are volunteering. The ones the ones that you already met as technical chairs today. If you wanted to test the presentations, or if you already had your presentations, you met some of our students, and I'm very grateful to them. And this many, many thanks to my colleague Doru Herinan, who answered your emails for the past months, and he knows as many things, or even more than me, about the organization of the conference. Now, of course, that an online event brings up many inconveniences, other than the fact that we are not meeting, not eating the sandwiches together, not going at the ice cream reception together, not seeing the poster session together. Other inconveniences are the fact that you received many emails with a lot of technical details, which were sometimes confusing. And I know it was not easy. And I really, really thank you for all your patience and for the fact that you accepted to have this event. So we have more than 700 participants. more than 400 abstracts, 30 working groups attending, 116 panels, and I'm very happy that we finally managed to do this, and I hope that everything works okay. And before I hand the floor, just some technical issues. I don't know whether you checked the website of EUROCRIM2020.com. We now have a publishers corner. So the publishers were very nice and accepted to offer some discounts for the conference. So just check the website and you will find that page there also. Then you saw in the document that we sent that we have a test meeting, a Google meeting, where you can just enter for 2 minutes and test whether your presentation works. I was there today with the students and I saw it was very helpful. So tomorrow morning, before your presentation, just test it there, because there are some issues which can appear, and I think it's very, very helpful. And then do not forget that we will be having the closing ceremony tomorrow at 7 Central European time. So we will be here on the exact same link, and we will broadcast the closing ceremony as well. And I think I am done with the technical stuff, and I'm very honored to now give the floor to Marcelo Ebi, the Executive Secretary of the European Society for Criminology.
Thank you very much, dear Andra. I will be brief, just mentioning a few mainly administrative things. So as you see, this is the 20th conference of the European Society of Criminology. We wanted to do something really special, really different, and you see that we managed to do it. And now, the consequences of this pandemic were that we move this meeting to an online meeting, but also we had to make some changes on the upcoming conferences. You will find this information on the website, but we are going to Bucharest in 2021 instead of going to Florence as originally foreseen. Then we will be going to Malaga in 2022, and we will go to Florence in 2023. So you see that we are optimistic, and we think that next year we will already be together again. The pandemic also had the consequences, of course, on the board meetings, which became virtual, but that didn't impeach us to try to manage to do everything that was foreseen. So as we announced on an email in July, we were obliged to conduct the elections online with the electronic system. I will come back to the results later. And we cannot have the General Assembly. You were supposed to have received the Executive Secretary report together with the materials before the conference. I am extremely sorry. I had a couple of personal complications, so I'm sorry I couldn't manage to send it, but you will get it immediately after. But I can anticipate the results, because it's just the presentation that couldn't be done. So last year was the year in which we have the highest number of members and also of participants in a conference. So all-time records. In Ghent, we had 1,433 participants, plus the 5 persons who participate with the fellowship. So it's 1,438. And we reach 1,386 members. So roughly 1,400 members and 1,400 participants. A very, very good year, with a benefit for the society of 62,000 euro. That, of course, gives us the opportunity now to run this conference without registration fees, and because we prepare. We never thought about the pandemic, but when we introducing the Constitution, the clause to have at least 3 years of running costs, the idea was if something happens, and of course this happened, so financially we will not have any problem at all. And then another thing that the board did during this term, under the heading of Leslie Macara, was you may have seen, I hope you have seen, that we announced a call for editors of editor for the European Journal of Criminology, and so the board finally has chosen Kylie Treiber as the new editor of the European Journal of Criminology. She will be starting his mandate in January 2021. So we want to thank Dario Melosi, who was the editor for 4 years. Thank you very much, Dario, and we welcome Kylie. She will be joining us in the online meetings that we probably will have until the end of the year, but take office only in January 2021. Then the other thing that we organized online was the elections. This allowed an increase in the participation rate, so 44% of the members participated. Of course, we had to cut at one moment 10 days ago, and so if you became member after that, it was impossible to vote. And so I can tell you that the results show that the new president-elect of the society is Catherine Weil-Leveld from the Netherlands. Of course, we cannot make applauses here, but in your mind, you can imagine that. And then the new at-large board member is Fernando Miró Linares from Spain, and the auditor is Daniel Fink. And then another thing that I would like to add is that this afternoon, we launched the latest interviews for the ECHO project, the European Criminal Oral History project that was launched by our former president, Rosella Selmini, in 2016. So we don't have a lot of people becoming members of our YouTube chain, but many people watch the videos, so subscribe. It's non-profit, but at least it would look better that only 160 when there are 1,000 people watching the videos. But go there. We have now a very large number of interviews available. Okay, that was all I wanted to say. It's mainly administrative things, as I mentioned before. And I would like to end by thanking Andra Trandafir, because without her her work during these months, this would have been impossible. She was very kind to say that we joined her. Most of us joined her every Thursday for discussions, but the work was done by Andra and her team. Doru also, who must be somewhere there. It sounded a little bit complicated when we started thinking that, and you know that other sister society are not conducting their conference, but Andra since the beginning was very optimistic, and so if we're here, it's thanks to her. So thank you very much, and now I give the floor back to Andra.
Thank you very much, Marcelo, for your kind words. I now have the pleasure to give the floor to Leslie Makara, the president of our society, for her presidential address.
Thank you very much, Andra. Thank you for those words of introduction, Marcelo. I want to begin by offering my own very warm welcome to this e-conference, and hope that everyone here, your family and your friends, are safe and well in these very difficult times. I'm very sorry not to be addressing you from the magnificent auditorium in the Faculty of Law in Bucharest. The Executive Board had a wonderful trip there last year, but I'm nonetheless delighted that so many members of the Society are taking part in this conference, which marks the 20th anniversary of the European Society of Criminology. And I'd like to thank you very much for all the support that you have given to the Society, and also to mark my own thanks to Andra and her team for organising the conference. It's not been easy, it's been quite complicated, and Andra and team have shown extreme patience with us all. So thank you again from me. So in my presidential address this evening, I want to celebrate the past work of our Society, but I also want to reflect on the futures of European criminology as both an applied and theoretically informed field of inquiry at a time of pandemic and increasing global turbulence. What I'm going to argue is that the European Society of Criminology at age 20 matters more than ever before. not just because the subject matter of criminology goes to the heart of many of the critical debates on individual behaviour, on citizenship, and on good governance, which the global pandemic has brought into sharp focus, but more particularly because of a normative project which has threaded its way through our history. A project which places human rights and social justice at the hearts of its endeavours, one which questions always and everywhere the power to punish, and one which places responsibilities on us as scholars to use research evidence to critically engage with the contexts of knowledge production. I'm going to make my remarks in three sections, a linear presentation. I'm going to begin with the past, I'm going to move on to the present, and I'll end with some reflections on the future. So let me talk about the past a little bit. So the ESC, as you all know, was established in 2000 with a number of key objectives as specified in our constitution. The objectives of convocation, of bringing scholars together from across Europe and beyond, of capacity building, which is about fostering research and training within academic institutions across Europe, of facilitating exchange and cooperation among scholars from Europe and also internationally, and dissemination of criminological knowledge at the European level. It is instructive, however, to read through the early editions of the Society's newsletter, and I've been doing quite a lot of archival research, and these were published for the first time in 2002. And it's instructive to review the themes which framed this first set of conferences in Lausanne, Toledo, which was the first one I attended, and Helsinki. Here, there is evidence that European criminology was viewed by many of the Society's founding members as a normative project, as much as a methodological or theoretical one. And this is captured in the closing lines of Professor Josine Jungertass's final presidential message from 2002. And I quote, and I love this quote, "Dear colleagues, these are my thoughts and my hopes for the future. We have made a good start. May we develop a European Society of Criminology that reflects truly European values, those of enlightenment, emphasizing reason, empiricism and human rights, and those of social care and support for the losers in our society." And her words echo the first subject matter of the first ever plenary session at the Lausanne conference in 2001, which was concentrated disadvantage and crime. And this was debated by Tony Bottoms, Manuel Eisner and Robert Sampson, with P.O. Wikström in the chair. And in launching the European Journal of Criminology, its first editor-in-chief, David J. Smith, argued that key drivers of a European criminology were not only the heightened political concerns about security and crime control across Europe, particularly in the wake of the September 11th attacks in the United States, but critically also the need to find a counterbalance to populist and punitive narratives through the promulgation of human rights protocols and conventions and a wider European criminological conversation. Our society has grown exponentially since these early days, with a 250% rise in participants at our annual conferences, and as Marcelo was saying, a membership of over 1,000. And with this growth has come increased evidence of diversity of subject matter and greater specialisation. Currently, we host 34 working groups covering such things as methods, both quantitative and qualitative, pedagogy and careers, variant criminology such as Balkans, cultural, narrative, life course and developmental, crime types, drugs, homicide, immigration, atrocity crimes, and justice, policing, sentencing, prison, juvenile justice, and many, many more. And a number of these groups have made explicit commitments to engage with policy and practice and bring research evidence to bear on law, process and intervention. Over time, the journal too has increased the scope and impact. The number of editions per year has been expanded to cope with increased submission rates, and heavy citations of published articles have led to the journal receiving its first ever impact factor in 2010, rather important in these days of metrics and management information. Our society has also played a role in building criminological capacity across European jurisdictions, including the provision of fellowships to enable conference participation from postdoctoral graduate students from a range of Eastern European countries where criminology has not been so well developed so far. The Society also disperses around 3/4 of the money raised by conferences to the host institutions. For example, the University of Sarajevo used this resource to build up its library. We also celebrate the contribution of scholars across the life course through our awards, as you will hear at the end of my presidential address. These are all developments of which the Society can be justifiably proud and demonstrate in no small measure the ways in which the Society has met its core objectives. But 20 years on, whither the normative project? So let me move to the present tense. If, as David Smith suggests, the first decade of the European Criminological Project was driven in part by the fallout from the September 11th terrorist attacks, it would seem at the end of our second decade that the global pandemic forms yet another critical juncture with profound implications for crime and its control, and with the potential to create yet another set of path dependencies. Ben Stickle and Marcus Felsen have claimed that the COVID-19 pandemic forms the backdrop to the largest natural experiment in the history of criminology, with a capacity to test the impact of sequential lockdowns and stay-at-home orders on the routine activities of populations, forms a great and a very fertile environment in which to test routine activities theory. Now, whilst recorded crime has been in long-term decline across many jurisdictions internationally, there is evidence that the lockdown and stay-at-home orders have resulted in further rapid and dramatic drops in crime rates in specific locales. However, this does not hold for all forms of crime. Studies internationally have found increases in domestic violence. For example, Boxall and colleagues in a survey of 15,000 women in Australia found that for those reporting experience of domestic violence from a current or former cohabiting partner, and that was around 12% of that sample, the pandemic coincided with the onset or escalation of the violence and abuse. There is evidence too of a major increase in cybercrime and fraud. In a Scottish study, Collier and colleagues highlight the ways in which the pandemic has opened up greater opportunity for suitably motivated offenders, opportunity to use new forms of cyber attacks, such as via the COVID-19 tracing apps, but critically also to use more conventional forms of cybercrime to exploit heightened popular fears and take advantage of the major shift to online in everyday economic transactions. Lockdown also appears to have exacerbated the risks of child abuse, with early research suggesting this may be due to a combination of stressed caregivers, reduction in child protection services, and increased exposure to abusers within the home or online. And of course, the lockdown too has created new opportunities for organised criminal groups to exploit. However, the implications of the pandemic arguably go further than this. The pandemic has cruelly exposed the fragility of social, political, cultural and economic institutions, with heightened crime risks from economic downturn and loss of critical educational connection for a generation of school pupils. There has also been the demise of cultural, sporting and other leisure events, and the shutting down of key civic institutions, including places of worship. The impact of the virus too reflects a global social order riven with inequalities. Death rates are significantly higher amongst the most poor, the most dispossessed, amongst older people, and those from specific ethnic backgrounds. Silent voices include some of the hardest to reach groups, such as travelling communities, asylum seekers and migrants, those experiencing homelessness, as well as those living with end-stage illness. The virus is also exposing a justice gap, with prisons in some jurisdictions becoming hotbeds of virus transmission, and in others, places of isolation and despair, as efforts to prevent infection lead to lockdowns for 23 hours a day, deteriorating prison conditions and rights violations. The policing of the pandemic may also be impacting disproportionately areas of multiple deprivation, with some international evidence emerging of widespread procedural injustices. Daniel Jones, in an eloquent article on the potential impact of the pandemic on police legitimacy, highlights the challenges the police face in enforcing public health laws and lockdowns in marginalised communities where police legitimacy may already be low. And my partner in crime, Susan McVie, in a Scottish study has shown that police special measures to enforce lockdown and social distancing, fixed penalty notices, were 12 times more likely to be issued to those living in the top 10% most deprived neighbourhoods compared with those living in the 10% least deprived. According to Susan McVie, the findings are indicative of justice inequalities in terms of who's been made subject to enforcement, but crucially also in terms of the drivers of their non-compliance. It is, of course, very early days, and much more research is obviously needed to track and understand these phenomena in the round. But it is important to acknowledge that COVID-19 has the potential to shape both the situational context of criminal activity and adaptations at the individual level, at the same time as potentially playing a role in reinforcing the structural contexts and institutional cultural practices which reproduce and intensify social harms and concentrated disadvantage. So that's the present. What then of the future? What about the future? Well, the transformations wrought by the global pandemic present us now with the opportunity, and I would suggest the imperative, to revisit Josine Jungertass's founding ambition for this society. The complex and multi-level effects of the pandemic and their potential for both direct and indirect impacts on crime and justice demonstrate forcibly the interdependencies of the institutional and policy frameworks across Europe and the continued need for criminological inquiry to engage with its counterparts in the fields of health, social care, education, economy, politics, and more. Importantly, the pandemic has highlighted the need for global cooperation and speaks to the moral responsibilities of nation states beyond their borders, as well as to the benefits which a reinvigorated public realm and properly resourced public services can bring. Whilst the pandemic has highlighted the fragility of extant social orders, critically, it has also exposed some fundamentals of human connection, volunteering, grassroots activism, small acts of kindness and altruism. All of these things have been exposed and talked about and celebrated across many jurisdictions. These are facets of the human experience at the micro level that belie the inequalities that I've just been describing. This underscores what we already know from things like desistance research, that relationships really, really matter. Those face-to-face peer relationships really, really matter. And in a Scottish study that I've been involved in on adolescent mental health and COVID-19, it's been very interesting to observe that the critical thing that young people feel is key to their well-being is the face-to-face interaction with their friends, not the online variant of that. It is the relationships that matter. As I said in my closing remarks to the conference last year, the European Society of Criminology forms an important site of methodological and theoretical crossings, as well as this place of convocation, debate and challenge. As such, I believe our community can speak to the twin dynamics of both micro-connectivity and macro cooperation. But in contributing to recovery and regeneration, and in setting an agenda for our third decade, I believe we need to continue to engage with a number of fundamental normative questions. What are the conditions of a just social order? What promotes social solidarity? What are the structural conditions which support human flourishing? How can human rights discourse come to infuse and transform institutional cultural practices? How can the European Criminological Project use its collective voice and institutional capital to reach out to our wider publics, including communities, politicians and policymakers, to build the robust research evidence base to engage, to critique and to enlighten? David, in his introduction to the first edition of the European Journal of Criminology, argued as follows, and I quote, "Scholarship is a constant act of renewal of the collective memories of what has been thought and discovered, and a systematic effort to build on it. And it is precisely, for me, by building on the legacies of our founding members and continuing to grapple with these fundamental questions that I believe that our great society has come of age. In closing, I'd like to thank the members of the European Society for giving me the opportunity to share as president. I can honestly say this has been the greatest honour of my career. After the prize giving, my last duty as president will be to welcome you to the plenary session at 7 o'clock Central European Time this evening, with speakers from criminological societies across the globe, including Sandra Waltplate, who's the president of the British Society of Criminology, Dan Nagin, who is president-elect of the American Society of Criminology, Tara McGee, who is the president of the Australian and New Zealand Society of Criminology, and Shinichi Ishishuku, who is the executive board member of the Asian Criminological Society. We will be debating crime, justice, and social order in a time of pandemic and the future direction of criminology. I hope that you can join us then. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Leslie, for this very nice presidential address. And I also hope that everyone will join the plenary roundtable. We are now going to our second part of the opening ceremony, meaning the ESC awards ceremony. So in order to introduce the first award, I will give the floor to Rossella Salmini. She will present the ESC European Criminology Award.
Thank you very much, Andra. Thanks everybody for this effort to organize this conference, this virtual conference in this strange times we are living on. I'm very pleased to be here tonight to to express the opinion and the reasons why we decided to give the Senior Scholar Award for 2020 to Professor Mike Huff. And I want just briefly to remember some of the reasons why that we discussed in our committee. I was the chair of the committee together with Goraz Mesko and Tom van der Becken as former presidents, as past presidents of the European Society of Criminology. Mike Huff is currently emeritus professor at the School of Law in Birkbeck, London, and he has been the leading UK scholar in the last 40 years in a variety of fields in criminology and criminal justice studies, particularly in qualitative and quantitative studies on victimization and fear of crime, policing, legitimacy and trust in criminal justice institutions, and sentencing and probation. His contribution to the development of criminological knowledge at the national in the UK, but also at the European level, as shown by his extensive comparative publications and his participation in a high number of European networks and projects, is really impressive. We found that it was really impressive, the work that he has done. His publication records, articles, books, chapters, co-author books, edited books, etc., research reports on a variety of topical themes for contemporary criminology, has generated the highest number of citations among the nominees in World of Science and Google Scholar. What the committee also appreciated particularly was the fact that as a former researcher or researcher officer at the Home Office and later in his career as an advisor to public bodies, Professor Hug has made a remarkable contribution to the development of policy-oriented research in criminology, and he's probably helped in promoting an active and engaged role of criminologists in European society. This is also demonstrated by many publications addressed not only to a scholar public, but also to a wider audience in Europe. Last but not least, we want to remember the fact that, we remember in our decision the fact that Professor Hug has been a long-term member of the European Society of Criminology, that he has been taken part actively in the Society's conference. This is the award of the European Society of Criminology, so this is one of the aspects that committees who decide about the Senior Scholar Awards take into consideration. And he was not only attending conferences, but organizing actively thematic panels, and he contributed in different ways in strengthening cooperation and networks among European scholars. In particular, I would like to remember that he was one of the co-editor of the European Handbook of Criminology, published in 2013, that even if it was not a European Society of Criminology direct project, I remember the first time that we started to discuss about that was exactly in the executive board of the European Society, and he edited that book together with other past presidents of the Society. So for all these reasons, we are very pleased to give the Senior Scholar Award 2020 to Mike Hug.
Thank you very much, Rossella, and congratulations, Mike. We now give you the floor for your speech.
I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
And thank you very much, Roselma, for that very generous introduction. It's a really good antidote to imposter syndrome, and very welcome. I'm going to do a short, 15-minute probably, PowerPoint presentation. So I won't see anything on the screen except what I mean to say to you. If I manage my technology. Right.
So I'm here if you need any help with the presentation.
No, I'm getting there. Don't worry. Of course, I'm really delighted to accept this nomination. It's a very nice thing to happen towards the end of one's career, and I'm very grateful to the Society. The Lifetime Achievement Awards imply that your career is pretty much run out of road, and that may well be the case. I found that the pandemic has completely fractured my work ethic, and I prefer to walk the dog than read journals. So it may well be that my career is sort of ending, but academics don't do that really. Like most old professors, I'm going to hang on by my fingernails until I'm pushed off the cliff, whenever that might be. What I want to do this evening is to reflect on changes to the policy environment for justice. It's in two parts. It starts with an angry rant on the retreat by politicians from values of honesty and rationality. And I'll end with a thankfully more upbeat take on applied research in partnership with justice agencies. So first, a sort of quick CV, a quick resume to give you a sense of where I'm coming from. I was alarmed to realize I'd done policy research for 45 years now, which made me think I was older than I thought I was. 20 years of that was in the Home Office, 25 in academia. At the center, I established the Institute for Criminal Policy Research. I think I understand the art of speaking truth to power. It's what I've been working on for that time. And in a sense, that makes me not really an academic's academic. I've learned all sorts of other dark arts about getting a voice heard. For the first 10 years that I was in academia, I was very close to government, not surprisingly given my background. We got loads of government grants. I had lots of close contact with government officials in the Home Office and with political advisors, ministers, a few cabinet ministers. But I guess from the mid-noughties, from about 2005 or 2007, there was a shift from away from government work by my centre and by myself. And this was only partly by choice. It's partly fading government, my contacts with government were fading, partly more prickly research managers in government departments, very much the attractions of nicer EU-funded work, and other external factors pushed me away from government, like the reductions in government money, reductions of priority to crime research given the crime drop, the global financial crisis, and as we got into the next decade, the way that a looming Brexit overruled every other policy consideration in the country. But also, looking back on the last 10 years, there's been a really big and worrying shift in UK politics, which has pushed me and colleagues like me away from politicians. It's the way in which the Conservative and Conservative Liberal coalition early in 2010 have increasingly been driven by ideology and have retreated from reasoned analysis and evidence. It was just horrifying to see how truth and honesty were Brexit casualties from 2015 onwards. Blatant dishonesty. And it's been clear, especially in the latter part of this decade, when Boris Johnson's administration got a grip on power, that there were large areas of significant distrust. The key Tory politicians increasingly distrusted the UK judiciary, international human rights institutions, their own civil servants, anybody claiming expertise. I think it was Michael Gove, one of our politicians, said the country's had enough of experts. And of course, the BBC. There's an increasingly clear agenda to marginalize any institutions that have been creating challenges or obstacles to the current administration. The consequence is that there are various doors in the corridors of power that used to be open to criminologists like myself and others in other disciplines, and I'm pretty sure they're now firmly shut for the majority. Obviously, this is a concern for myself. Should it be a cause for wider concern? My answer is yes, if these shifts reflect structural factors, and I think we probably agree that they do. The impact of economic globalization, fueling inequality, that leading to groups of angry people left behind and socially marginalized. The interaction of that trend with the impact of new social media, which amplify and normalize ideologies of hate, which can be exploited by politicians if they choose to be populist. It can be exploited if they promise national resurgence and return to past glories. And of course, that's exactly what our Prime Minister has been doing. And then once populist politicians achieve power, they can and do chip away protections to the democratic process. The UK government is doing exactly that. Just a few of the things that evidence this, that they're mounting a review of human rights legislation and a review of judicial scrutiny of political decisions. They are making threats to the funding of the BBC, which will surely make the BBC's sense of security in challenging political decisions harder. And they're politicizing the civil service. We've seen 6 of the most senior civil servants sacked in 2020. The UK experience resonates with the US, of course, and there are plenty of other countries in Europe that are beginning to show similar patterns. So what for the future of applied criminology? I've given up waiting for the phone to ring from the Home Secretary or the Justice Minister. And in any case, I've had a lifetime award for contribution to criminology, which means I'm at the end of that road. These politicians don't trust criminology, and I don't trust them. But I do see some rays of sunshine for policy research. UK justice agencies still need and value reliable policy research. There really is an appetite for good criminological research in Britain. And it's not just bodies like the police or the courts or the prison service, but the bodies that hold them to account, like the College of Policing, the Inspectorate of Constabulary, our National Audit Office, the complaints machinery, judicial bodies like the Sentencing Council, are not research hostile. And my centre's worked happily with all of these over the last 10 years, whatever the political mood has been. I think there's a growing important role for international research. I think international comparative work is really powerful, and it sheds a bright light on the factors that nourish and sustain the rule of law, which is why I've put a lot of my energy towards that sort of work in the last decade. I'm very gratified with the impact of some of this work. I work on procedural justice in particular. The work on the European Social Survey by John Jackson, Ben Bradford and myself has really reached senior cops, College of Policing, Policing Inspectorate, and others outside of Britain. I should do a little bit of subliminal advertising just to say that this will shortly be published. Sorry about that. And I also mentioned ICPR's work on sentencing and courts, now led by Jessica Jacobson, which has focused powerfully on legitimacy in the courts process. A final encouraging development is the evidence-based policy movement, which I think is a further source of optimism. The UK network of What Works centres, including the College of Policing's What Works Centre in Reducing Crime, should have some offsetting tendency. It should help offset politicians' tendency to discount or ignore research. So, in conclusion, I've gone on long enough. Forgive my pessimism about the political landscape. I really hope I'm proved wrong, but maybe proved right. We'll see. My pessimism is offset as well by my optimism about working closer to the coalface of criminal justice, and I hope that my colleagues will carry on doing that. I should say how much I valued working with them and with a wide range of academic colleagues, both in the UK and further afield. Probably working with international networks of researchers has been one of the most rewarding aspects of my career. A final piece of advice to those who aspire to get an ESC Criminology Award: choose colleagues smarter than yourself. I've always told myself to do that. That's all. Let me end by thanking the ESC again for its 2020 Criminology Award. I'm very flattered, very honoured, and chuffed to bits. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Michael, for your words, and congratulations again for this award. We are really very happy to have you here, and thank you, really thank you. We are now be passing to the second award of our ceremony, the ESC Young Criminologist Award. And in order to present the award, I will invite my dearest friend, Anna Maria Getosh-Kalak, to do so. Anna, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you, Andra, for passing on the word. And it is my great pleasure, especially since I also had the pleasure of working with Rok Hartzin, to hereby present the ESC Young Criminologist Award for 2020, which obviously goes to Rok Hartzin for his article, Prisoners' Perceptions of Legitimacy of Prison Staff in Slovenia, published in 2018 in the European Journal of Crime, Criminal Law and Criminal Justice. Rok Hartzin has a highly promising academic profile and an explicitly European, thus international outlook. His article focuses on prisoners' perceptions of legitimacy of prison staff in Slovenia. Dr. Hartzin was able to get access to a wide array of settings, including all Slovenian prison facilities, and empirically tested complex theoretical premises regarding legitimacy. He successfully argues why legitimacy of prison staff is important, which he also convincingly positions in the context of post-socialist societies. Furthermore, his sharp analysis provides necessary nuances according to different prison regimes. The committee particularly values his European outlook, which clearly demonstrates that concepts and generalizable models require contextualization and testing in different settings. The article raises and answers important questions for the criminological understanding of legitimacy in a highly skillful manner, so I can only recommend you all to read it. And therefore, it is my great pleasure to hereby present Dr. Rokhatzin with the 2020 ESC Young Criminologist Award. I have absolutely no doubts that the recognition and the prestige that come with the award will be a tremendous source of motivation, dear Rok, for your future work. And I wish you, together with all the other members of the committee, as well as I'm sure with all the other members of the ESC, great success with this work. And in order for you not to miss the applause, so it's only a single applause, but you will imagine the rest of it.
Thank you, Anna. Well, yes, Sandra. Okay, thank you for this great introduction. First of all, I would like to say that I'm truly honored that the ESC Young Criminologist Award was awarded to me. I wish to thank the members of the award committee and the ESC Executive Board to found me fit for such a great honor. I would also like to thank Goras Meshko and Chuck Fields for their incredible support during my, for the time being, short career, and especially during my doctoral studies. So, because I know they are watching, mentors, thank you very much. Last but not least, I wish to thank my astoundingly supportive family and colleagues from the Faculty of Criminal Justice and Security in Slovenia for their support and great cooperation. Andra, that is all for me. I kept this short, so thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you very much, Rok, and congratulations. It's very nice to see you and to see you receiving the award. Very happy for you. So I would like to make a small change in the order of the awards, if that's okay with you. And in order to present the ESC Early Career Award, I will give the floor to Letizia Paoli, if it's okay, the change of order. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Andra. Can you all hear me and see me? Good. Thank you very much for giving me the floor, but also for organizing these online conferences in this weird Corona time. I think many people really appreciate that. And I would like also to take the opportunity to congratulate the two other recipients, and particularly Mike Huff for his career award. But I'm here to give for the first time the ESC Early Career Award. This is an award that recognizes the outstanding scientific achievement of an early career European criminologist, the first time that this award is being granted. And I'm very happy and proud that I can this evening confer the award to Wim Martens from the University of Ghent. And I'm happy to do so, not just because Wim, not just because in the meanwhile I've become kind of half Belgian. So on the contrary, I work at the KU Leuven, and the KU Leuven is, so to say, the rival university of the, I mean, compared to Ghent. And anyhow, I mean, my possible Belgian biases were certainly offset by the two other members of the committee, namely Professor Effie Lambropoulos from the University of Athens and Eva Inselt from the University of Budapest. And the three of us were unanimous that Wim fully deserved these awards. And indeed, we were happy that by choosing Wim, we could really set also very high standards for these for future competitors. And Wim deserves this award despite his young age, both from a natural and a scientific point of view. He just received his PhD in 2010, but since then he has been a very prolific author. He has published already more than 25 articles in international peer-reviewed journals, also in journals with very high impact factors, because he does not only publish in criminology journals, but also in journals of other disciplines that have even higher impact factors. He has also many other publications in peer-reviewed journals with impact factors, including many publications in Dutch. But Wim's track record is not only impressive from a quantitative point of view, but also from a qualitative point of view. He has a broad expertise that spans many fields: quantitative criminology, survey methodology, but also big data analytics, crime prevention, policing strategy, security, new technology, but also he has done work on sports-related crime, radicalization, and terrorism. And in particular, the committee found his work on predictive policing in Europe thoroughly groundbreaking. Predictive policing is an important and upcoming theme in criminology. And Wim was the first European criminologist to launch a large-scale research program on this topic in 2015. And his aim so far in this field has been twofold: to develop and test evidence-based predictive policing algorithms in Europe on the one hand, but also then to conduct real-time field experiments in police forces on the other hand. And this program has already resulted in several studies, in very high-level publications in renowned journals, and several ongoing PhDs in these new fields of criminology that Wim is supervising. And that's why the committee came to the conclusion that Wim fully deserves this award. En I can only add, Professor Wim, ik feliciteer jij met deze prijs. Jij verdient het volledig. Thank you.
Many thanks, Letitia, for your very kind words. Let me first of all stipulate and underline that I'm very honored and pleased with this early career award of the ESC. I'm very proud on this. So let me thank a few persons. First of all, the ESC board and the ESC jury for their trust and their appreciation of my work. I really appreciate this. Second, as many of you know, criminological research today is often a very intensive collaboration with colleagues within your own discipline, but also outside your discipline. So I want to thank all my colleagues with whom I worked the last couple of years. And I especially want to thank my research team, which is an excellent team of enthusiastic junior and senior researchers, and I'm very proud of them as well. Last but not least, I want to thank my wife, of course, for her never-ending support and for accepting my sometimes special way of living and organizing my working hours. So many thanks to all these persons. Looking forward to the future, I want to highlight that I'm very eager to focus on the topics that are mentioned by Letitia, like crime prevention, policing strategies, securities and new technologies, and sport-related crime. But especially I want to build further on my research line on big data analytics and big data techniques, which can be interesting and innovative for criminological research. And predictive policing is one of these topics that I see as my spearheads. So to conclude, I think the ESC, the European Society of Criminology, did a very great job with organizing this online conference, and I'm convinced that the next physical conference, which will be a great success, and I'm very looking forward to meet everyone there in real life. So thank you everyone, and take care.
Thank you very much, Wim, and congratulations for winning this first award. Very happy for you. We are now moving to the fourth award, the ESC European Journal of Criminology Best Article of 2019 award. And in order to present that, I will pass the word again to Leslie Makara.
Thanks very much, Andra, and congratulations to all the winners of all of the awards. Outstanding, outstanding scholarship. So the jury for the best article published in the European Journal of Criminology comprises the president of the society, so me this year, the editor-in-chief of the journal, so Professor Dario Malossi, and the winner of the prize in 2019, Dr. Maria Liebach-Pedersen. So this year's prize is awarded to Steve van der Veer, Rutger Lukveld and Wim Bernasco for their article, which is entitled Determinants of Reporting Cybercrime, a comparison between identity, theft, consumer fraud and hacking. The jury was in accord that the article was an outstanding theoretical and methodological contribution to knowledge, and one which set a challenging agenda for the future study of cybercrime. I thoroughly recommend it. I have it here. It is a wonderful article. It's lucidly written, so very much recommended. My congratulations to you. On behalf of the whole of the jury, I offer my warm congratulations.
Thank you,
Yes.
Leslie.
Thank
Please.
you, Leslie, for your kind words. We are really honored to receive this award, and also on behalf of Rutger Leukveld and Wim Bernasco, I would like to thank the committee for awarding us this award. And we would also like to thank all of you for organizing this online conference, which is very much appreciated. And we're particularly happy that this award was awarded to an article that focuses on cybercrime, because during this pandemic, our lives are more digitalized than ever, as also is illustrated by the fact that we're all sitting behind our computers instead of in Bucharest. But still, in criminological research, most attention is focused on traditional types of crime. And there's still a lot of knowledge to gain about cyber criminals, cyber victims, and policing cybercrime. So we hope that this article will also inspire other criminologists to focus more on criminal behavior in cyberspace as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Steve, and congratulations again to the three of you for winning the award. Thank you for your words. For the distinguished service to the ESC award, I will give the floor to Mikhail Tori in order to present it.
All right. I am sitting in Rossella Selmini's seat, though I could never possibly fill her shoes, because I wasn't able to work through the wonders of Google Chrome, which I've never used to connect myself. Will somebody nod if they can see me? I can't see myself on the screen. All right. So I was probably one of many people who received emails announcing the creation of this new award and asking if I might like to nominate someone. Since I have been involved with the ESC since, strange as this will sound, 1995, I thought, yes, I should nominate someone, and I should nominate more than one person. My original plan would have been to nominate 3 people. David J. Smith, the first editor of the journal, Martin Kilias, the principal organizer of the ESC, and the late Yosin Jungertas, who, with Martin Kilias, made this reel. So I wrote the board and said, well, I'd like to nominate somebody, but can I nominate 2 people rather than 1? And they said yes, which is how come you have a twofer this time. So I'm going to say a little bit about each of the 2 winners, but I want to provide a little background. My guess is that a significant proportion of the people watching this now, and who may ever watch it again if it's online someplace, weren't present at the creation of the ESC, because after all, this is the 20th meeting. And I wanted to say a little bit about that as staging for speaking briefly about the two nominees and winners. So the ESC was first a glimmer in the eyes of Martin Kilias and Josine Jungertas in the mid-1990s. That's why I said I have a memory of it that goes back to 1995, talking about the frequency with which they went to ESC meetings, in part in order to see Europeans. Martin and Josine organized a small meeting of about 8 people at an American Society of Criminology meeting in Toronto in 1999. Josine was there, Hans Boutelier was there, Martin Kilias was there, Ernesto Savona was there, I was there, and a couple of other people whose names, unfortunately, I've forgotten right now. We discovered that the ESC meeting had 2,200 attendees, of whom 600 were from Europe. And as we talked to people about why we were there, we kept hearing this, well, this is the most efficient way to see other European researchers, to go to the ESC, which seemed crazy. So that group collectively decided to organize a European Society of Criminology. Josine, with support from Henk van de Bont, then head of the Research and Documentation Center, was able to raise money and schedule a meeting in The Hague in 2020 that became the first institutional moment in the life of the ESC, and things have gone on since then. Since the ESC would not exist were it not for those two in the journal, were it not for David, in the forms they exist now, that seems to be something that ought to be acknowledged the first time a service award is given. So I made only 2 nominations because Josine unhappily left us some time ago. The first one was of David J. Smith. Now, David J. Smith is and was a giant in British criminology. As long ago as the mid-1980s, for a project in the US, we were trying to identify the leading police researchers in the world, and there were only 2 candidates from Britain. One was David J. Smith, and the other was Rob Reiner. And David came to our event and impressed us as much as we were told we would be. That was unusual because David was not then an academic. He was working in something called the Policy Studies Institute, which was a nonprofit doing really very interesting and fundamental research on policing and on racial discrimination in Britain. Later on, as I'm sure is well known, David became a professor at the University of Edinburgh, and later on, I think Leslie McCara has been involved in this, became the founder of the first major prospective longitudinal developmental study of crime and delinquency in Scotland. When he agreed to be the editor of the European Journal of Criminology, it was in a fit of idealism. Now, if he's listening to this, he may tell me that I'm being nonsensical and looking through American rose-colored lenses. But it was a sense of idealism, as almost all of us shared then, the sense that it really would be immensely useful and satisfying and gratifying if we could create something that looked like and felt like and really was a trans-European intellectual community of people interested in crime and the criminal justice system. He took on the job at the peak of his career, right? He's not a 35-year-old. He is a major international figure who has lots to do with his time. He took on the job of creating the EJC. And he did it in a way that laid the foundations for its eventual recognition in 2012 or 14 or 15 as being among the top 15 or 20 international journals in criminology and criminal justice, building on the foundations David laid. It takes an enormous amount of work to establish a journal. There was a lot of negotiating with the ESC board, and then with SAGE, and then with the University of Edinburgh, and negotiating contracts and the like, and then trying to staff up an enterprise and figure out how to pay for it and create procedures like How do you receive and review manuscripts, and how do you get them into the hands of reviewers, and how do you establish a meaningful peer review system? And he did all those things, and he did it immensely well. But in that fit of idealism that I described to him, the ideal was not only let's do this as well as we can, it was let's try to achieve this mission of a trans-European intellectual community. So one of the things he did from the very beginning is give huge emphasis to recruiting writers from countries that were not then internationally actively engaged in criminology. Now, people were engaged in their own countries, but they weren't in international networks. So he worked really hard to recruit writers from Eastern Europe and from Southern Europe, which were then not as, by far, not as much engaged then as they are now. And often, in order to be able to publish work from people who were not accustomed to writing in English, David did the drudgery of editing and revising people's writing to put it into a colloquial British English form that was appropriate to be published in an international scientific journal. He also created an advisory board. Now, everybody has advisory boards, but David took his seriously and bullied the ESC board into providing some money every year in order to convene that advisory board at the annual meeting and actually talk seriously about how the journal was doing, what it could be doing better, how it could identify people from whom to recruit articles, and so on. So the ESC journal is successful now. Not all of David's initiatives have followed through as he had started them. For example, there was a tradition in the early days of having a separate so-called country essay in every issue of the European Journal of Criminology. That way, over what would be 7 or 8 years, every country would come up once, and people who wanted to have a handle on what was happening could do it. All right, David did a magnificent job as editor of the EJC, and he established a first-rate international journal. So I conclude my remarks about David J. Smith and turn it back to our moderator.
Thank you very much, Michael, for the presentation. And I will now ask David to say a few words. Congratulations in the first place for this wonderful award, David. You have to turn on your microphone. David, you have to turn on the, yes, great.
Can you hear me now? Good. Thank you very much indeed, Michael, for your very kind words. I'm actually quite embarrassed by them and rather overwhelmed, to be honest. But I suppose rather reluctantly, I have to believe what you say, because I know you're such an honest fellow. I find it difficult to accept that I made quite as big a contribution as you talk about. Going back to what Mike Huff had to say in response to his award, he mentioned that it was a lifetime award, was something you get at the end of your career, and maybe he was coming to the end of his. And I have the kind of feeling that if a lifetime award is an end of career award, maybe a distinguished service award is a late, award, even later than that. And I mean, to illustrate that point, perhaps I should say that I have some experience of using things, not this one, but Zoom, rather than this conferencing thing. But what I use it for is having clarinet lessons with my clarinet teacher. And that may tell you something about a certain shift in my priorities that's happening at this stage in my career. I also need to thank Martin Kilias, who played a key role, as Michael has said, in the early history of the society, but also specifically in formulating a plan to establish a European Journal of Criminology. And along with others, perhaps rashly decided to entrust me with bringing them to fruition. And founding the European Journal was a challenge that tempted me because I was only official, perhaps because, or partly because, I was only officially labelled a criminologist quite late in my career. like most other academics of my generation, with criminology somewhere in their job title, I'd never even studied the subject. At university, I studied experimental psychology and philosophy. After university, being already married and with a small baby, I immediately got a proper job in the commercial market research sector, which is how I really learned about doing social research. As Michael mentioned, at the age of 30, I moved to a social research institute in the non-profit sector. And there I carried out a whole range of large research projects on topics like racial discrimination and disadvantage in Britain, inequality between Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland, measuring the effectiveness of secondary schools and through longitudinal studies of children's progress and development, time trends in psychosocial problems of young people, and as Michael also mentioned, the policing of London. And of course, it was the policing research and the studies of youth problems and development that led towards criminology. But I first became officially a criminologist at the age of 54. It was only then that I had to try to learn something formally about the subject. And 6 years after that, I took on the journal. I found it an interesting challenge because it made me have to think about what European criminology could and should be. My thoughts were set out in an editorial which Leslie referred to earlier, Criminology and the Wider Europe, in the first issue of the journal. The founding fathers of what we now call criminology were, of course, French and German, but American scholarship was crucially important in the middle of the 20th century. And in any case, the US dominated the field through the sheer weight of funding and volume of publications. So our central aim was to facilitate the development of criminology across the full range of European countries, not necessarily on the American pattern, but not in facile opposition to it either. I saw myself as someone with a bag of tools that could be applied to a range of different problems. I also noted that the other criminologists of my generation, like me, had come to the topic from a number of different disciplines. And of course, the founding fathers of what became criminology certainly did not even consider themselves to be criminologists. So I could never see criminology as a single discipline. Instead, it's defined for me by the use to which various disciplines are put. It's a field of application rather than a way of thinking or a way of gathering evidence. At the most fundamental level, this field of application is not defined by crime, but by the social practices and institutions for dealing with it. For these social practices and institutions, as well as responding to crime, determine what crime is and infuse it with a set of meanings and implications. My reason for labouring the point is that it broadens our view about what a journal of criminology should cover. The field is multidisciplinary. It places the apparatus of compliance, the police, the courts, the probation service, the prisons, at the centre, so that links between criminological research and moral and political choices are inescapable. Criminology is inevitably related to policy, yet its implications inevitably go far beyond the immediate concerns of government administrators in getting the existing system to operate more effectively. The journal was launched at an opportune moment in January 2004, when in many European countries, crime and crime control issues were moving from the periphery to the centre of politics. There was heightened awareness of threats to security, which were linked in popular discourse and political debate to increasing immigration. At the same time, there was a growing emphasis on human rights, combined with an increasing willingness of governments to infringe them. An entirely different stimulus to the growth of criminology was increasing movement and communication between countries, leading to exchange of information about crime and criminal justice and the need to work to common standards. Certainly, the journal came at the right time to help facilitate a growth of criminology across Europe in response to those pressures. The volume of submissions and of pages published, as has already been mentioned, has substantially increased since the first issue in January 2004, and so has the impact factor. The ambition to publish articles from a wide range of European countries, which Michael Tonry emphasized so much, and I tried to emphasize a great deal. That ambition is gradually being realized. In January 2014, at the request of the then editor of the journal, Paul Nepper, I published an article reviewing the 215 articles that had been published in the journal from the first issue in January 2004 up to the end of 2012. Unfortunately, I haven't yet brought that up to date with a further systematic review. But in that article, I mentioned what I thought were the strengths and the weaknesses of the output up to then. And I'm not going to repeat that, but I want to more or less conclude by just giving examples of three things, three opportunities for further development of topics to be covered by the journal. The first is comparative research. There has been, well, let me say that I think that the European Journal should play a crucial role in publishing comparative research, precisely because within Europe there is such a rich field of variation between particular countries and so much more room for comparison and analysis than you find within the United States, which is where much of the comparative research that's so far been done has been done. There have been some important comparative studies published in the journal. There's room for a great deal more. And specifically, what I'm hoping to see is comparative work that compares European countries so as to test, if you like, grand theories of crime and punishment in a systematic way, because for the most part, there still is a division between the people who write grandly about theories of crime and people who write about what's actually going on. I think bringing those two things together through comparative research is absolutely key, and it can be particularly well done by using European data. Secondly, I would like to see analysis and evidence about how the politics of crime in various countries frustrates reform and how that can be overcome. We know from evaluations of particular programs for preventing crime or changing offenders that some of them work. This is really a separate point about evaluation. I'm sorry. We know from evaluations of particular programs for preventing crime or changing offenders that some of them work, but such programs are usually not successfully implemented on a wider scale, both for political reasons and for a multitude of other reasons too. I'd like to understand more about the problems of scaling up implementation, as well as about why reform proposals get frustrated by politics. And finally, an entirely separate point, and I say this as a member of an Anglo-French household, which is a pretty important fundamental thing to me. Can we persuade the French to participate in the journal and also in the society? We haven't been very successful in doing that so far. I want to conclude by thanking one other person. When the journal started, the editorial team had minimal support from the publisher. Now, of course, the editors have it easy. We all think, if we're old, that we had it tough and young people have it easy. But it's true. There is now a magnificent electronic submission system that makes it impossible for any submission to be forgotten or mislaid. I dare say the computer itself comes close to reviewing the articles. In our day, there was unfortunately much more scope for confusion. It would have been impossible for me to cope on my own. So I used the editorial fee to fund a postgraduate scholarship won by Georgios Papanikolaou, who then also served as my editorial assistant, and he's now a reader in criminology at the University of Middlesbrough. I'm very much indebted to him for his sterling work. And like Mike Huff, I'm delighted and chuffed and extremely pleased to have been given this award. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and congratulations, and thank you for all the hard work. And I think now I should pass the floor again back to Michael.
All right, and would you once again nod if you can see me, because I can't see myself. All right, very good. So I shall not speak so fulsomely this time as I did last time. It's now my privilege to explain why I offered Martin Kilias with David Smith as an entry in this rigorous competition this first year. I've said a little bit about that already, but I'll say a bit more. So I'm an American, but I've spent a good deal of my career in Europe in one way or another. Since the mid-1980s, Martin Kilias, in some sense, was widely seen as embodying Swiss criminology. He was the person who was involved in every major project in Switzerland, but he was also the person involved on the Swiss behalf in projects internationally. He was, for example, along with Patricia Mayhew, one of the original, and John van Dyck, the original creators of the first International Crime Victim Survey. Of course, that came out of the Dutch Ministry of Justice. In Switzerland, Martin was, probably this is not well known now, for many years a juge de la Cour de Cassation of the country. He was a member of the highest criminal court in Switzerland for many, many years. And he undertook a program of research in Switzerland that was unusually extensive and sophisticated, and unusual for that time, quantitative. He was one of the early people seriously using experimental designs to test the effects of innovations such as free provision of heroin to addicts in parks in Zurich. So Martin had a distinguished career in Switzerland, and he too was not in first youth when the ESC was started. But as I told you, he and Josine Junger-Tas had schemed about such a thing or dreamed about such a thing for a good many years and went through the process that I described. And after that meeting in Den Haag in 2000, that group who were listed on the ESC board webpage as the founders or something like that, collectively decided to create a European Society of Criminology. Well, that's very nice to have the intention, but as most of you know, who've been involved in work of association, somebody may agree to chair a committee, but unless they do a lot of work, nothing ever happens. So someone had to do the work to make the ESC happen. Josine did a great deal of it, but Martin did the principal part. So after that meeting in 2020, how do you create a European Society of Criminology? Well, you have to create a board of some kind that's got to make decisions. So he handpicked a board of the European Society of Criminology, a preliminary tentative board. And working with that board, they decided to hold a, excuse me, a first annual meeting in Lausanne in 2001. Martin agreed to and undertook the work of organizing all of the physical elements of that meeting, including a wonderful initial gala dinner on the Thursday night on a cruise around the lake that Lausanne sits on. Josine took on the job of planning the program. Now, of course, I'm sure they worked together, but it was she who worked out the logistics of people submitting abstracts and organizing panels and figuring out who plenary speakers were going to be, and they pulled it off. I forget the number, Marcelo I'm sure knows, 150 or 250 people came to that first meeting, and it was a huge, huge success. And at that meeting, the plans were made for the next 2 or 3 meetings in Toledo and in other places, Edinburgh and Helsinki. So the ESC was launched. All right, so we're launched, but there's still a huge amount of gritty, boring work to be done. Someone has to figure out a system for collecting dues. Someone has to create an accounting system and receive the bills and pay the bills. Someone has to do all that communication with people about reimbursing their expenses for plenary speakers and Lord knows what. Someone had to design a constitution and bylaws for the organization. Martin had to figure out where on earth to organize the European Society of Criminology. And working with lawyers on the faculty of the University of Lausanne, they surveyed laws of European countries and determined that the easiest place to organize a scientific society in Europe was the UK. So this is hugely unknown, but probably for 15 years, the official home of the European Society of Criminology was at the Cambridge Institute of Criminology, which did nothing about it. The books just sat in the file drawer, I think, until they were finally given to Marcello or thrown away. But Martin did all those things. And in addition, until they found a Marcello Aby, Martin was the Marcello Aby. So he was the organizer. He organized the first meeting. He was elected as the first president. He did all of this tedious, detailed, practical, strategic, and day-to-day work. And so here we are, 20 years later, in a certain sense, in Bucharest. And I'm delighted that I was able to nominate these two distinguished people. And I turn it over to Martin to explain how embarrassed he is by all these things I've said about him.
Sorry, I will have to intervene because if you saw me on the phone a few minutes ago, it's because Martin was supposed to intervene from Horta. Those who know him know also that he's a place where he likes to meet people. And unfortunately, there was a problem. You have to cross the Alps from Switzerland, and there was a problem in the bridge, in the tunnel. And he's extremely sorry. So he's been texting me all the time, thinking that he was going to make it. But unfortunately, he cannot be here, which is extremely sad. So he wanted to find the right place to participate and finally couldn't reach it. So, of course, he thanks everyone. He thanks Michael for this nice speech and the jury for having chosen him. And hopefully next year, when we will try to give you in hand the diplomas, he will be able to say some words. Well, thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcelo, for sending us Martin's thoughts, and congratulations to him too. Thank you, everybody, for presenting this award. We are now moving to the last, but of course not the another very important award, which is the ESC Book Award. And for this, I will invite Alexandras Dobryninas to present it.
Okay, hello everybody. I guess it's my turn and pleasure to announce the decision of our jury for ESC Book Award. The jury consisted of three persons: Jose Angel Branderitz, May Len Skilbray, and myself, Alexandras Dobryninas. And I must say that we have a very challenging and very hard work, because we have three excellent candidates, and our task was to choose the best from the excellent. So the decision of our jury was to recommend to the board of EEC to announce the winner for EEC Board Award, the book Life Imprisonment, Global Human Rights Analysis by Dirk van Zyl-Smit and Catherine Atherton. In our analysis and recommendation, we put that this in the book, we has to emphasize at least three very important elements. First of all, it's an encyclopedia-like monograph, which provides a broad review on relevant literature on life imprisonment worldwide, paying significant attention to the phenomena of very long pre-sentences in every continent. Its thereby supplies an amazingly nuanced picture of this topic in penology, so that the book will be relevant to anyone who wants to get an overview of this field. Second, the life imprisonment masterfully combines a variety of scholarly perspectives in its approach to the topics under the study. The human rights law is evidently the soul of the manuscript, but it is adequately coupled with the empirical gaze that goes far beyond the law in the book and jurisprudence viewpoint. It presents the relationship between practice and their consequences on the one hand, and human rights doctrine and the case law on the other. This means that the book contains a reflective and dynamic discussion on how the human rights framework should shed light on the boundaries of this practice, rather than aesthetic human rights evaluation. And third, Van Zyl-Smith's and Appleton's book is a result of rare ability to mobilize global academic networks to obtain up-to-date information on life imprisonment in the wide variety of world regions, subcontinents, and jurisdiction. And the jury expressed the belief that this and many other aspects of this book will turn very soon life imprisonment into a classic book, a hallmark of 21st century European criminology. As I was mentioned already, the jury decided anonymously to recommend the book Life Imprisonment, a global human rights analysis by Van Zyl-Smith and Catherine Appleton to the ESC Book Awards. As you know, the ESC board also accept this decision, and right now, on behalf of the jury and the ESC board, I would like to congratulate authors on winning this prestigious award.
Well, thank you very, very much, Professor Dobrominas. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you to the jury, and thank you to the European Society of Criminology, all of you. Catherine and I are very deeply honored. It's a wonderful award to win. In his citation, and this evening, Professor Dobrominas described our work as a global criminological effort, and it really was that. And not only did we have an excellent multinational research team in Nottingham, but in virtually every country of the world, we were assisted by people who shared their knowledge with us. Every one of them deserves our thanks, for not only did they share empirical information, but in many, many cases, so much more. Information about the law, information about how life prisoners are treated, and perhaps most interestingly, information about the ebb and flows of debates about the meaning and desirability of life imprisonment in their native jurisdictions. Our book is dedicated to Roger Hood and Jim Jacobs as mentors and friends. Both of them had a profound influence on us and our work. Catherine will say something about Roger in a moment, but allow me a word about Jim's role. Jim Jacobs was the first person with whom, in the early 1990s, I discussed my idea of studying life imprisonment comparatively. And as our current project grew, he supported us in a myriad of ways, most practically by organizing a group that met Catherine and me in New York in 2017 to work through our manuscript with us. It was a bit like doing a day-long PhD viva, but certainly it saved us from many errors. Sadly, as many of you will know, Jim passed away in March this year. and we would like publicly to dedicate this award to him. So what did we learn? Empirically, we can now say for the first time with confidence that life imprisonment rather than capital punishment is the ultimate penalty used most often worldwide. Formal life imprisonment is the most severe penalty that can be imposed in 149 out of 216 countries and territories. It is the most severe penalty also in current international courts and tribunals. We estimate that there are about 500,000 prisoners serving formal life sentences worldwide, compared to about 20,000 on death row, most of whom will never be executed, and many who will have their sentences converted into life imprisonment. The second thing that we learned is that studying a topic such as life imprisonment on a global scale requires modesty. A moment ago, I spoke of formal life imprisonment, but there are many thousands of prisoners who are serving indeterminate sentences who are not labeled as life prisoners, but are serving sentences that give the state the power to keep them in prison until they die there, which is our definition of life sentences. Then add to these other prisoners that have fixed term sentences, but very long terms, in some instances 100 years or more, which gives them no prospect of release. The result is that we're talking about a significant part of the world population of sentence prisoners, but we're not yet able to estimate how many. Thirdly, how does one critique the practice of imprisoning hundreds and thousands of prisoners who may legally be kept to die in prison? As Professor Dobrynina pointed out, we sought to produce a human rights-based critique of life sentences, but again, we were confronted by the complexity of our subject matter. Human rights law on life imprisonment is not yet fully formed. The view that human rights require that there should be no life sentence at all is still a minority view. It is official policy in only 32 countries. So what we did was to collect a wide range of empirical data that would allow us to address a series of questions. If one has life sentences, on whom can life sentences legitimately be imposed? For what can they be imposed? How should lifers be treated? Importantly, how should their release be considered? And what should happen to them after they're released? Our conclusions are nuanced. In an ideal world, there may eventually be no life sentences, but given how drastic they are, if they remain on the statute book, they should be used much less frequently. We argue strongly that all persons sentenced to life imprisonment have a human right to a reasonable prospect of release, which implies a prison regime that gives them opportunities to improve themselves before facing, as the European Court of Human Rights has emphasized, a clear and fair process for considering their release. We believe that our book, which you've honored, provides a basis for a radical reductionist program. However, going forward, more work will be required to develop human rights-based strategies supported by further empirical information on what
Sorry, it appears that you turned off your microphone by mistake and we can't hear you.
There are counter tendencies, and this is really serious. The counter tendencies are towards introducing life sentences where people have no prospects of release, LWAP. And this is something which really should be combated in all possible ways. But for the moment, all I simply want to say is thank you very much. Catherine will explain how she thinks we should be going forward.
Thank you, Dirk. Just before moving on to our plans for the future, Dirk, could you just mute your microphone to prevent feedback? Thank you. I also want to sincerely thank the European Society of Criminology for this award. It's an absolute honor. It really was quite a shock to receive your email, I would say, but a very nice shock. And it certainly lifted our spirits out of the pandemic for the rest of that day and also for the remaining month at least. So sincere thanks from both of us. As Dirk mentioned, we also dedicated our book to our colleague and friend, Roger Hood. I'm not sure if he will be listening today, but he is very much aware that the inspiration for this book came from his pioneering work on the death penalty worldwide. I also first started working on the topic of life imprisonment under Roger's leadership at the Oxford Centre for Criminology, which is some 17 years ago now, much to my dismay. Little did I know what was to come, but thank you, Roger. And I would only emphasize what Dirk has already said about the book project clearly being the result of a global criminological effort, of which we feel extremely privileged to be part. One of the most positive outcomes is that it is a project that has started to influence change on the ground for life sentence prisoners in some jurisdictions already. And we hope it will continue to impact practice and start to change the situation for life sentence prisoners around the world. Which brings me to talk just a little bit about where we are going with this work and our future hopes for the Life Imprisonment Worldwide project. First, we're very happy to report that we've secured funding for the next 2 years to carry out round 2 of data collection with colleagues at the Human Rights Law Centre at Nottingham. So I was delighted to hear the positive nudges towards international and comparative criminology. To those of you who have helped us in the past, I must warn you that we're about to come knocking on your inboxes again for more recent data, albeit with a slightly modified and hopefully shorter survey. So at this point, I should mention that we are particularly grateful to Marcelo Aby and his team for including life imprisonment in the Council of Europe annual penal statistics. For anyone who is wondering, life imprisonment population figures for Europe are particularly easy to find, thanks to their work. Secondly, we are working very closely with Penal Reform International on life imprisonment reform globally. Based on the findings from the book, we have developed a policy briefing for practitioners who are working with life sentence prisoners, which has now been translated into several languages. Penal Reform International have also established a global coalition on life imprisonment reform, which we know some of you have signed up to, and we hope that we can inspire many more. The aim of this coalition is really to raise the profile of the human rights issues that surround life imprisonment and to bring together academics and practitioners around the world who are working closely on this topic. We also hope to have gone to Japan earlier this year to the United Nations Quinquennial Crime Congress to discuss with the Japanese Parliament their position on life imprisonment as an alternative to the death penalty, but also to challenge the United Nations to start thinking about the need for international standards on the imposition and implementation of life imprisonment. But while the Congress has been postponed inevitably, we hope to work with the UNODC on a handbook on life imprisonment as part of their international series on criminal justice. So please watch this space. And then finally, for our Spanish-speaking colleagues, and if I'm allowed to add a small marketing plug here, I just wanted to let you know that our book will be available in Spanish very soon, hopefully before the end of this year, thanks to a translation of the book by our close colleagues and collaborators, Beatriz Lopez Lorca and Javier de Leon Villalba. We're very grateful for their work. As our findings emerge, we found it particularly fascinating to discover that many Spanish and Portuguese-speaking countries do not allow for the sentence of life imprisonment or the death penalty as their ultimate sanction. This makes us continually question why life sentences exist and are imposed with far too much gusto and enthusiasm in most of the English-speaking parts of the world. But on that note, I will simply finish by sending through my screen our joint thanks once again. We are both thrilled and very humbled to receive this special award, and also just very happy to be part of this online event, despite not being able to be present with colleagues in Bucharest as hoped. So thank you.
Thank you, and congratulations from me too, Dirk and Catherine. Really good job. Thank you very much. So thank you all for the award ceremony, the recipients and the chairs. As we now have to move to the plenary roundtable, we propose that we take a very short break, a 5 minutes break, maybe it is useful for all the participants. We will not stop the broadcasting nor the recording. We will be here, but we will be back in 5 minutes. Okay, thank you everybody, and congratulations once again.
There's over 200.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Andra.
No, go ahead, Leslie. It's for you to chair the session, so you're happy to be back.
Thank you very much for that lovely musical interlude, and welcome back everybody to the final session of today, which is our plenary roundtable. I'm delighted to welcome a very distinguished lineup of speakers, and I hope that you can all see them and perhaps they might wave when I introduce them. So we have speakers from criminological societies across the globe. So this is probably one of the very few times that there's a sort of convention of criminological presidents. I'm not quite sure what the collective noun is for presidents. Remember, give you that as something to think about. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Professor Sandra Walklate. So Sandra, would you like to sort of indicate who you are? Thank you. Who is the president of the British Society of Criminology? And secondly, Professor Shinichi Ishizuka, who is a member of the executive board of the Asian Criminological Society. So Shinichi, would you like to wave to indicate where you are? Shinichi, yep, excellent. We also have Professor Tara McGee, President of the Australian and New Zealand Society of Criminology. Tara, would you say hello? Good afternoon, good evening. And then finally, Professor Dan Nagan, who is the President-elect of the American Society of Criminology. Welcome, Dan. So the provocation I set the panel was whither criminology, where is criminology going? Crime, justice and social order in a time of pandemic. And how we're going to run this is each member of the panel will speak for around 5 minutes before we open up for questions, comments and general discussion. And then towards the end of the session, I'll get each of the speakers then to give some final remarks. Now, if you want to participate, we do want the audience to participate in this with questions, with comments, with thoughts on what is said. But because of the tech arrangements for this conference, you have to email them to the address that you can see on your screen now, and then they'll be conveyed to me via the chat function on the screen that I can see, and then I will try and then relay them to the speakers. So it's going to be a little bit of a baton passing arrangement. I hope it's going to work really well though. So I hope you will bear with us with the technology. So I'm going to first of all invite Professor Sandra Walklate to respond to the provocation. Some of our panelists will use PowerPoint, some won't. But Professor Sandra Walklate, welcome and thank you for participating in this panel. Sandra, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Leslie, and thank you to the ESC for the opportunity to speak to you all this evening, middle of the night for our Australian colleague, but thank you all for that. And particularly thank you to Leslie for reconstituting a panel that was an idea for the British Criminology Conference that obviously never bore fruit because we were earlier in this pandemic process and probably a little more nervous of engaging in virtual events. But as time has gone on, we've all become more accomplished at all of this stuff, I guess. But thank you for doing that, Leslie, because it is a unique opportunity to get the 4 presidents in the same place at not the same time, but, you know, speaking together, responding to a provocation. Interestingly, and I don't think this was deliberate on anyone's part, this was exactly the title I was invited to speak on at the Asian Criminology Conference in June 2015. And I presented on this title, and it very kindly, the Asian Journal of Criminology published that presentation in 2016, and it actually won the award for the best paper published that year. So, you know, wins all round as far as I'm concerned, but it was a fabulous conference to go to and a fabulous opportunity in that setting to think about the nature of criminology. In that presentation, I was influenced by the emergent agenda of Southern criminology, and I drew on the critique of the state of criminology in general from the work of Jock Young and the work of Wayne Morrison. Wayne Morrison you might not know so much, but he's been someone I've worked with in and around criminology and war. And I took as my theme, if you like, the failure of mainstream criminological work to see, in inverted commas, the ordinariness of everyday violence, violences in the plural, I should say. And in that failure to see the everyday nature of violences, there is also a failure to see gender. And I don't mean, I mean gender as differentiated from sex, sexuality and gender. If we're going to talk about these things, we need to measure all 3 variables, it seems to me. But the failure to see gender is a crucial one, because that casts the gaze, the criminological gaze, more often than not away from men. And also at that time, 5 years ago, the continuities between the perpetrators of everyday violences were along gendered lines were just not visible in criminology at all. They become very, very slightly more visible since, you might want to say, and that there's a recognition, for example, that lone terrorists aren't lone terrorists at all, but they usually have a history of violence against women in their lives that ends up being public violence at the end of their story. Since that time, I've been really, really lucky to be working in the Northern and the Southern hemispheres. So I now hold a post at Liverpool and a post at Monash University. And that has been an incredibly positive and learning experience, I think, to see the discipline of criminology through a different lens, particularly through the lens of those working in the Southern Hemisphere. I want to be careful, though, because my interpretation of Southern criminology isn't just a geographical one. It's also about taking account of marginalised voices, voices that are not normally given a space within the discipline. As it happens, I was doing my visit to Monash in January earlier this year, and as I sat there and watched the spread of COVID from our near neighbours, as were then in Australia, to the Northern Hemisphere, and actually startled by the way in which many Northern, in inverted commas, governments was completely ignoring what was going on elsewhere in the world. Huge lesson there, I think, for us all. How that process of that transfer of something like a pandemic, what that has done to marginalised voices and what that continues to do for marginalised voices and for marginalised voices. For me, where I'm working and the lens that I'm interested in, it's clearly put gendered violences right in the centre of public policy concern. That stretches from the stay-at-home directives that many societies have adopted, where women's security has become a crucial concern for responding to the pandemic, knowing that being at home is not a safe place for many women and children, but also in other spaces and places too, where the challenge to what's seen as to be a legitimate violent response, whether that be by the state or by an individual, in the street, in other places, in other spaces. So that continuity of gendered violences is actually right in our faces right now, across the globe. So I think my simple answer to the challenge for criminology, and there are many criminologies out there, but I think they all face the same fundamental challenge, is that how do you center the question of how do we know things? How do we know things? My take on that is gender gives us a framework for knowing things, for understanding things, for thinking about the world, for taking account of the marginalized. In helping frame that answer, gender isn't just a variable to be measured. It's a conceptual framework for helping us think differently about the world and about what matters in the world. And gendered violence is crucial, I think, to understanding some of the challenges that the pandemic has posed across all societies, in one dimension or another. And I say it's a challenge because it's kind of interesting, and that would be my response, because it's kind of interesting that unless we meet this challenge, I think we end up in the place that Stan Cohen wrote about in 1980 in his essay on the last seminar. We end up parading our subjects as though we know about the world when actually we don't at all. That's it. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandra, for that ending with a provocation too. Really interesting. And now moving on to Professor Shinichi Ishizuku, who is a member of the Executive Board of the Asian Criminological Society. Welcome. And you're going to have some slides, I believe, and also just remember to undo your microphone. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Rosalie. And thank you, Sandra. And thank you, and introduced an annual Congress of ESC. And so I can show you, and it's okay. So, and my theme is in whether in the criminology. And at first, in the background of the Japanese and trend in criminal justice now. In Japan, and this is a number of reported crimes and from 1926 to 2010. And now in Japan, and the number of reported crime and increasing, but since 2002, and so yeah, decreasing now. It's a very few number of crimes, and this is the number of crimes, and this is an average number of prisoners. Prisoner number and decreasing now. In this and the background, and now in Japan, yeah, it is a traditional structure of street crimes. For example, theft and traffic and offense is more than 85%. But now changing crimes and as a contemporary trend and addiction, abuse, violence, and harassment and the new types of fraud and hacking are increasing now. This is the background of my report. So, and additionally, it is important in Japan and changing criminals, offenders, and the traditional and the criminals, yeah, and Lombroso has already explained. And so and concept of atavisms. But now, and new and criminals, the contemporary deviant delinquent are over and excessive and reacted and to a highly advanced civilization and process, and they are not thrown back and bad and howling. So when not throw back and but going too fast, this is one type and a new type of criminals. So in pandemic, so in Japan, and the control and the crime rate and at an entrance and protect and at the exit. So and in Japanese government and control number of PCR tests in order to protect the medical systems, because it was an afraid and of a pandemic panic of hospitals like in China and New York in 1990s, and the most developed country and suffered from overcrowding prison. And the criminal justice in Japan had, however, avoided such failures. So, and police agency and controlled at entrance. So in the prison was and not so and overcrowded. Second, and the pressure to conform. The Japanese government has a power to control people to refrain and from going outside unless necessary, but and without sanction by law, but only with the recommendation in declaration of emergency. And Robert Martin divided in 5 adapting patterns, that is conformity, innovation, and literalism, and rebellion. So typically in the United States, and symbolize an American dream and emphasize on the goal of monetary success, but without a corresponding emphasis on the legitimate avenue to attaining the dream. And the contrast in it is in a Japanese society that and each community pressured more or less for all members of confirm its value and pattern of behaviors. Japanese literalisms and required people to control themselves to confirm the uniform pattern of behavior without punishment and without sanction. Third, and moral panic and decriminalization. In this context, some group did not confirm the recommendation. It is a very big sanction, social sanction, and many casino game hall and so-called pachinko stop operating their halls, but small number of them opened, to which a lot of pachinko funds rushed together, and the mass media form and scrum to blame halls and funds. So, and traditionally, many owners of pachinko halls are Japanese Korean. It's very important. Now, in the hate crimes, a victim of hate crime in Japan is Japanese Korean. And it degraded and as gambling and comparing with, for example, horse race and operated by the local and the central government. It is one kind of hate crime to roots deeply in the Japanese society. In same context, a host at a nightclub or sex workers and who were infected in the coronavirus were criticized and blamed and as an epidemic center. Such workers are probably booed and discriminated by and frustrated public. So, And a lot of residents in the virus and the spreaded areas are required to stay at home alone and keep social distance with others. Therefore, some of them feel obliged to stay home or be isolated. It results that they could not or would not go out, and not only in the physical but also in the social means. We can call these phenomena as nesting. And if offenses should be prevented, and such problematic behavior could be treated by any agencies. In my opinion, criminal justice system is able to control only offenses and offenders by police power. Therefore, it is better than social supporting organizations could treat outside of criminal justice systems. So in Japan now, there is no faculty of criminology in university. And if we will develop criminology as normal science by Thomas Kuhn, we need a cycle of research, education, and social implementation, which makes a community of criminologists who share the common paradigm and with them. In Japan, we have neither faculty of criminology and graduate nor graduate schools. Our university proposed trying to establish Ryukoku criminology that is characterized as compassionate criminology in Japan. Next year, we hold an 12th annual conference ESC. We presented that concept. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And on to our next speaker, who is Tara McGee, President of the Australian and New Zealand Society of Criminology, who is coming to us really in the middle of the night. I'm not quite sure what time it is, but I think it must be about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. So thank you for joining us just now. So Tara, over to you.
Thank you, Leslie. Yes, we're clicking round to 3:30 in the morning. So my apologies if my words don't come out in quite the right order this morning, this evening, whatever time it is, wherever you are. Thank you, Leslie, for your kind invitation to participate in this panel. I want to acknowledge a few of my colleagues who I managed to have virtual hallway conversations with about this idea, this provocation that you provided for us. And I want to acknowledge Susan Dennison, Jason Payne, Janet Ransley, Rick Brown, Rick Saar, Tara Hodgkinson, James Ollison, Martin Andresen, and Danielle Harris, all for sharing their thoughts with me on this topic. It was very useful. Sandra just talked about marginalized voices, particularly within the lens of Southern criminology that she's been influenced by in recent times. And while this gendered violence that is of crucial importance, the most marginalized people, those who faced the genocide of colonialism in Australia and New Zealand, are the First Nations peoples. And being located in Australia and being an Australian provides me the opportunity to acknowledge that I am living and working on the land of the Turrbal people, and they are one of the First Nations peoples of this country. I acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of this land, and I pay respects to their elders past, present, and emerging, because I am living and working on those lands. I'd like to extend this acknowledgement to all First Nations people attending this session, and in making this acknowledgement, I renew our commitment in the Australian New Zealand Society of Criminology to redressing the harms of colonisation in Australia and New Zealand, as well as working with and learning from our friends. So for those of you who've had a look at what's been happening in Australia and New Zealand during the pandemic, you'll know that our governments have been very stringent. New Zealand more so than Australia, but Australia as well, Our country is shut down. Australians aren't allowed to travel. We're not allowed to leave the country. I can't travel over the border to visit my brother in the next state. Our state borders are closed. Our cities are shut down. Victoria, one of our states, is in stage 4 lockdown, so that people can't really do anything or go anywhere. As others have highlighted, this pandemic has flow-on effects for our most common objects of study as criminologists. We have new controls, new crimes, new curfews, border guards, and limitations on public gatherings in unprecedented ways for many countries. It's not unique to Australia and New Zealand in particular, but from my window to the world, I think our policies have been fairly restrictive, but also very successful in reducing the spread of COVID. But they do raise important questions for us regarding state control, impacts of crime, the procedural justice in all of these matters, to name but a few. At the same time, though, we've seen innovation in our criminal justice system, with virtual communication technologies being imported into court systems really rapidly, and also into prisons, where historically there was great reluctance to do so. The efforts to speed up things like bail applications, grant more bail applications, has deliberately lowered the prison remand population in many states of Australia. In Australia, all our correction systems are run at a state basis, so there's variation throughout the country. And these practices show us what is possible from a policy perspective and highlight how it's policy that's a key driver of things like prison numbers. All of these changes have happened outside the involvement of criminologists and researchers because they've just been happening so rapidly. And there's possibly a risk that in all of this, we've missed an opportunity to trial different evidence-based approaches and evaluate what's happening in these settings. At an institutional level within academe, in Australia and New Zealand, the pandemic hit us right at the start of our academic year. We really get into our teaching around the end of February. So this has resulted in catastrophic financial losses in terms of student dropouts and also loss of international student income. All of our universities are going through early retirement and voluntary redundancy schemes ahead of large-scale sackings. The number that in my particular institution is 380 people are going to lose their jobs. So in Australia, we're also facing massive changes in the way our universities operate, the way our governments fund the humanities and social sciences. And there's currently a Senate inquiry into funding of these disciplines. So the impact of all of this on our future criminologists is yet to be seen. In Australia, we have a PhD model much the same as the United Kingdom, and our students are reliant on casual contracts and supplements for their stipends during their training, and those jobs no longer exist. The university will not be making any of these, universities don't make any of these appointments in these catastrophic financial losses. So it will be interesting to see what the flow-on effects of possible slowing down of training of criminologists will have on our discipline. We also know that the pandemic has disproportionately affected women, and it's yet to be seen what this impact will have on future participation of women in the discipline. In terms of research, the pandemic has exposed the inaccessibility of real-time crime and justice data throughout Australia. Only 3 of our states provide monthly data, so it's really hard to get a picture of what's happening. Many people who work within criminal justice agencies have also lost access to their research sites because everything in Australia and New Zealand has been shut down so tightly. No research can take place. Despite these difficulties, the pandemic's provided opportunities for the analysis of the impact of an exceptional event, the pandemic being quite the exceptional event. And the research we do have has shown that many categories of crime have decreased, But a notable exception to this is gendered violence. As Leslie mentioned in a plenary address earlier tonight, survey research from the Australian Institute of Criminology shows that 2/3 of women who've experienced physical or sexual violence by a current or former cohabiting partner since the start of the pandemic said that the violence had escalated during the pandemic. Other analysis of official data shows that crime has remained stable or fallen, but the major exception to this is sexual assault, which continues to rise year on year up to June 2020. So we know as social scientists that it's those people who are subject to disadvantage as a result of our current social structures are the ones who also disproportionately are affected by negative events. In Australia and New Zealand, colonisation has created a social structure which has sought to marginalise First Nation people. But we do need to move beyond these markers of disadvantage to recognise the data sovereignty of these peoples, where data is created by these peoples for these peoples. And for those interested in this, understanding this better, I commend Maggie Walter's work to you in this regard. It's hard to be positive in the context of a global pandemic, but I am known for my irrational optimism at times, and I think it is needed in these troubled times. And this is not to minimize the very real harms and struggles that are occurring during this pandemic. This week has been Social Sciences Week in Australia, and we've moved entirely online, much like this conference. And the result has been, rather than things going more poorly, we've had unprecedented levels of participation and communication of social science research, conversations and critiques throughout the country. Perhaps the silver lining in this very dark time is increasing connectedness through new forms, increasing willingness of our criminal justice system to adopt innovations, and opportunities to answer important questions. I'd like to close my few minutes of speaking with congratulations to the ESC Local Organising Committee for forging ahead with this online format with great success. And just note that ANZOC is planning to proceed with a conference in December 2021 at the Gold Coast if our government opens the borders once again. So we welcome everyone there. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you very much, Tara. And now on to the final speaker, Professor Dan Nagan, who is the President-elect American Society of Criminology. So welcome, Dan, and I'm glad we've got the technical things sorted. It's been a bit of a journey getting that sorted, but I'm delighted you're here. So welcome. And they invite you.
Thank you, Leslie, for inviting me and bearing with my technical incompetence at these matters. I'd like to speak narrowly about the impact of the pandemic on the American criminal justice system and crime. In May, I received a grant from the U.S. National Science Foundation. They have these kind of rapid grants, and in particular, they provided some funds for me to study the impact of the pandemic on U.S. corrections populations, particularly jails. We were focusing on in crime rates. And I got together a terrific group of students to study this. And I'm gonna use my time here. We don't have a lot of time to speak to two impacts which are relevant for different reasons. One is on jail populations, and the other on homicide rates for different reasons. And in doing this, let me just give you some rough dates in mind in the U.S. which are relevant to this discussion. Our analysis was mostly at a city and/or county level. Roughly speaking, the 30 largest cities in the United States, and the counties in which they are, because that's jails are generally administered in the U.S. at the county level. So we did that. And as for dates, while the lockdown and kind of opening up dates in the U.S. varied from place to place, roughly speaking, the lockdowns began mostly in mid-March, and things began opening up in late May. And late May, in fact, in particular, May 25th is when the George Floyd incident occurred, and all that ensued from that. So it was kind of roughly coincidental, also with the opening up, periods in most U.S. cities. So with regard to jail populations, it's generally less recognized that in the U.S., I think I'll call it notorious, mass incarceration in prisons, the 5-fold increase in prison in the imprisonment rate beginning in the early 1970s, it leveled off close to about 2010, but imprisonment rates remain very, very high. But coincidental with that was also a comparable increase in jail populations at the local level, which is less well recognized. So getting to the impact of the pandemic on jail populations is the pandemic beginning in March, is generally across these 30 cities, there are some exceptions, have resulted in substantial reduction in jail populations by about 30%. And those reductions persisted up through the end of June. What's going on now? We don't yet have the data because it comes out slowly for much this kind of basically the same kind of reasons that Tara was talking about. The specifics are different, of course, between Australia and the U.S., but it doesn't come out on a timely basis. It's my maybe hope that those reductions in jail populations may actually persist to some degree, because there's one of the major contributing factors to it. It's more than just that. Is what I'll call broken windows policing kind of things of having arrests for minor crimes or not even crimes. They're often municipal ordinances and so forth for things like disturbing the peace and small amounts of marijuana. Those kinds of arrests are also down sharply across the board. And given the social movements that are going on, it's at least my hope that, and I think we'll see. My prediction is that to some degree they'll persist. Maybe I'm being Pollyannish like Tara as well, but we'll see whether they persist. And then with regard to homicide and crime rates, we found that impacts on crime, there were impacts, there were some crimes that were reduced on violent crimes, unlike what Tara was reporting, for Australia. We did find that reported rapes and sexual assaults are down. Mind you, these are reports, and as are robberies, and that for property crimes, that larceny, for example, is sharply down, but for example, not auto theft. But I want to speak specifically to homicide because I want to put this in the context of what I being an American, view as our surreal presidential election. I suspect it looks at least as surreal to you on the outside. But what we're finding with regard to homicide, and this is contrary to claims that are being made in the political campaigns, but also by other analysts and newspapers, is that we found even during the pandemic, that period roughly from mid-March up through the end of May during the lockdown periods, we really didn't find any evidence of a change in homicide rates, in terms of year-over-year comparisons with 2019, and also importantly controlling for seasonal effects. Homicide in the United States, and I suspect as well elsewhere in the world, is highly seasonal. seasonal, and sharply increases during the summer months. And so what we found is that not only have homicides not changed during what I'll call the lockdown period, but they've also not occurred in the post-lockdown, post-Floyd period either. As in our large cities, and this is contrary to lots of reports. And the reason I link this to our surreal presidential election is that President Trump is blaming this non-increase on Joe Biden, and when in sort of in the context of normal political situations, the president would be taking credit for it, not blaming somebody else for it. So that's why it's a kind of an unusual finding, which I wanted to tell you about and tell you, some of you who, I don't know how much reporting of the presidential election is going on outside of the United States, but so I would fill that one in because the issue of violence and law and order and so forth is becoming a primary topic of the presidential election. So that in a nutshell is what we've been doing, and we've got still much more work to do on this, but it's been a very it's been a rewarding project because it's been with a rewarding group of students, and again, getting back to the U.S. presidential election, a rewarding group of students, many of whom are from all across the world. Who, if I had my way, I'd pay their airfare to the U.S. and have them stay forever. So that's my short piece.
Thank you very much, Dan. Yes, I mean, I think the US and also the UK possibly share some issues with political leadership at the moment. So I'm not wanting to make this about the UK, but as a Scot, I think we're feeling slightly nervous about developments here in the UK as well. So we've now come to the point, thank you all for your contributions. We've now come to the point where we're going to invite the wider audience to please send via Andra and the EUROCRIM organisers your questions, which will then hopefully appear in the chat, and then I can then translate this and help to curate a conversation between the participants. I thought there were some really 4 big themes for me come through everything that people have been saying. One, actually, a really important theme that Tara touched on, which is about what's the future of criminology if there is this shifting uncertainty about jobs and early career people in insecure, precarious job contracts. How do we actually help develop and build capacity for the future generation when university finances are under threat? And equally, I suppose, what governments may seek to fund in terms of research that may end up having a COVID lens for quite a long time, that mean other more fundamental questions might get neglected. I think that was an important theme. Then about criminal justice process, about how maybe that has changed in some respects for the better, in the sense that you have maybe people being sent out of prison slightly earlier, maybe lower arrest rates, and so on. That those are things that may have happened, and yet actually the situation of prisoners and the situation of some of the marginalised communities who become over-policed is also is paradoxically not positive. And then the notion of marginalised voices, gender violence, colonialism, post-colonialism, Black Lives Matter movement, and insecurities and problems with equality and diversity. How do we get voices listened to? There's a whole stream of things where the COVID pandemic may very well be exacerbating some of the issues around racism, and how do we actually overcome that, and how do we get governments to listen and act? And then finally, the thing about data and how slow it is to get data, and how do we manage data, and how do we ensure that we actually, how do we know, which is a question that Sandra raised in her first presentation. How do we know, and how do we get the data to know, and what is the right kind of lens through which we should try to understand what is happening? So I'm not getting any questions so far. So perhaps I could ask our panelists just to reflect on, to begin with then, what they see for the future of criminology given what is happening to the young people and the early career scholars getting a foot in the ladder and being able to build a career in the context where universities all over the world are actually facing enormous financial pressures. So could I maybe ask, Sandra, would you like to kind of come in on that one?
Yeah, I think it's the experience of that is incredibly varied and variable. And I also think it's important to recognise that there are continuities there. That you know, the academic career has become increasingly more precarious over the last 20 years. Yeah, and people on short-term contracts and so on has become a feature of the employment of academics, not just in criminology. So I think it's kind of not helpful just to focus on the pandemic moment, because I think there's a continuity of issues around HE, and I think they will play themselves out differently in different contexts. We've seen a deliberate government policy in the UK for the idea that all 50% of all 16 to 18-year-olds need to go to university. And, you know, I think there's something at the government level strategically that needs to be thought about there. But we've seen a proliferation in 20 years or more of places calling themselves universities. And I have to say, do we need all of those places? Because at the same time as that's happened, we see a shortage of skilled workers in other areas that don't necessarily come with the label of you need a degree to do this. So I think those issues will play themselves out differently in different societies and different contexts. They're playing themselves out acutely differently as I'm picking up information from Australia, because at this moment there's also been a change in the fees regime that's been a double whammy for the social sciences in particular in Australia. So there's been the loss of the international students and the change in fees regime all at the same time. And that's a bit different than what's going on in the UK, you know, and will be different to what's going on in the US or Japan or Oslo, you know, Scandinavia or whatever. So I think that's a bit difficult to predict, because it will play itself out quite differently. I think the dangers in thinking that through would be that, if you like, there will be some particular places, some particular considered historical centres of excellence that will survive that process much better. And for historical reasons, not necessarily because they are the best places now. And you know, that's the sensitivity I would want to play to in terms of the discipline. What are we losing in that bigger debate? But that's a debate not just for the professional societies. I think that's a debate that we all must be having with governments too.
Sunichi, can I bring you in and ask about the situation in Japan and in Asia in terms of actually how universities are hiring, and whether they are equally facing the kind of financial pressures that we've definitely seen within the UK context and beyond?
In Japan, now when the university and all university stop, and in summer and only in the spring and summer, then only an online and lecture. So and the research is stopping now, and the foreign student and don't come to our country. So when there is no contact with and foreigners. But on the other side, and a little bit changed. Now an online and lecture or online and meeting is available for Japanese and people on the Japanese student. It is one merit, I think, and so. But and the Japanese and especially in Tokyo is a very high risky an area. It is very difficult to start in university and director and rector and so on. And Kyoto is the Kansai area and the west area. It is better than in Tokyo. So now when the university is confused, and so this autumn and this fall, and we are starting a new movement, new starting point now.
Thank you. And now we've got our very first question, which has come from Susan McVie, and I'll just read this out. It is great to see presidential representatives of criminology from across the world, and tremendously interesting to hear both the similarities and differences in challenges to the future of criminology as a result of the pandemic. Do the speakers believe that the political context across different countries will impact on the purchase of criminology as a provider of rich evidence-based policy research in the coming years? And then there's a follow-up, and if so, how? So do the speakers believe that the political context across different countries will impact on the purchase of criminology as a provider of rich evidence-based policy research in the coming years? And if yes, how? Tara, can I come to you first, please, to respond to Susan?
Oh, goodness. Well, I think we were just starting to get some purchase with selling the evidence-based story in the spaces I've seen in Australia. But with facing the pandemic, people had to make big decisions very quickly within courts, within a whole range of settings, within prisons, within juvenile justice. And a lot of those decisions were panic button decisions. And I think it will be hard to change what these decisions have put in place. But also, that's the kind of the pessimistic side of me. They've kind of just run down these highways with what they think might work in the context of a pandemic. But then the optimistic side of me says that, you know, this shows great flexibility and ability to change when historically we may have been faced with, this is how we've always done it, why would we change kind of attitudes. So that's my 2 cents, or whatever currency we're supposed to be talking in.
Thanks. Dan, could I ask you to address that question as well? Dan, can you hear me?
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Sorry. Yes, I didn't speak very loudly.
Yeah. Okay, my mic's on. Well, I'm again. I'm gonna speak to this, you know, from the lens of the U.S. context. Is the theme of the conference that I'm going when I'm president is going to actually be called you know, is evidence-based policy in a fractured era, and the unfortunate thing that I see happening, which has been this has been happening for a while, but certainly has been exacerbated in the last 4 years, is that the use of science has become politicized, so roughly speaking, the Democrats are saying, you know, we're basing our decisions based on science, you know, and many of the Republicans are just basically ignoring it. But the regrettable part of it is that on both sides of the thing are examples of motivated reasoning, motivated in the sense that both sides are politicizing the use of science and policy, as opposed to sort of just treating the fact that, okay, you know, science, you know, should be one of the foundations upon which, policy should be built. It can't be built entirely based on science, because policy also reflects competing values on all kinds of different issues. But separating the value judgments from the science, you would like to see happen, and that both sides would be speaking with a common voice, based on the science, and maybe have differing interpretations of it. And so, unfortunately, in the U.S., that's not happening now. I hope the ship can be righted, on that, but we'll have to see.
Sorry, thank you very much. I've now got a question from Michelle Berman. So, does the panel think that by framing our understandings and conjectures of the future exclusively through the COVID-19 lens, we risk occluding other significant social, political, and economic harms that criminology may be able to address and challenge? How can we ensure we keep our eyes on all of these goals in a precarious future? So is our lens as an academic society distorted potentially by the COVID-19 pandemic? And can we actually keep our eyes on all of these balls, the social, political, and economic harms that criminology can address and challenge? Can we keep our eye on that in this very precarious future? Sandra, I'm going to come back to you if you would like to address that first.
Yeah, I hear what you're getting at, Michelle, but I actually think that this is actually a moment at which to seize those issues and put criminology to the fore in addressing those issues. I'm a bit like Tara on this. I'm like, let's go out there and get it right. Let's go and get the grants. Let's go and do the research. Let's actually use this as a moment to put the things that have been of central concern to whatever criminology you're into, and put them squarely on the agenda. And yes, it is politicized, but the criminological agenda is essentially a political one in lots and lots of ways, because once you start to say you're going to provide evidence to affect policy's in the political domain, and it's going to be debated and interpreted in whatever way politicians see fit. But you're not influencing it unless you're out there with a voice talking about it. And I say that because I've seen, particularly in relation to the gendered violence agenda, going back to something that Tara mentioned about greater connectedness. There's this wonderful global gender and COVID-19 group existing. It's got hundreds of people on it. And yes, okay, it's a bit annoying because you get lots more emails than you would do normally, but there is a lot of work going out there, and there's a lot of work where people are connecting from different disciplines with different issues in different societies through the actual demand that we connect in this kind of way. And that's going on at a global level. At a local level, the ESRC's rapid response mode for applying for grants in the UK. I was at an event yesterday. They've funded 92 grants since the beginning of March, spent £23 million on social science work and COVID-19. Now, there's a group of those that are actually deemed to be about crime, but actually the interconnections between the kinds of things that we're concerned about in relation to harms are very, very clear. And so there's actually a moment in which the discipline may actually have more influence and more to say about what's going on. And let's not forget, a pandemic provides a particular moment, but the consequences are going to be longer term, because of some of the changes of legal requirements in relation to the state, some of the changes in relationships between the citizen and the state. If I go back just to being safe in the home, relationships change, and that will take the impact of that will take some time to display itself. So, I'm kind of optimistic that this is a moment that the discipline can seize, not a moment to be afraid of.
Thank you. Tara, could I ask you also just to respond to that as well, please?
Yes, I really agree with everything that was just said. I was thinking about it through the lens of my own research. It's often what I turn back to, even though I'm meant to be thinking in a much more presidential way at the moment. But in the case study of my own research, you know, we're about to go into the field and we're looking at intergenerational transmission of victimization, and we're looking at a third generation of our longitudinal study. And while, you know, in this particular case study, while we're still looking at the same things, we have this natural experiment of a pandemic that happened in this 40-year longitudinal study now, that we can start to ask questions about the, you know, children spending more time at home with families. Do they thrive more? Does that differ by advantage and disadvantage, both structural and financial and gender and ethnicity and all those things that we're interested in? I think that the same questions remain, but we have different conditions in which we can explore those questions.
Thank you. I mean, one of the things that I've been struck by is how much, especially in the early days of lockdown in the UK, but I think this happened elsewhere, was a sense that we need to have a new normal, that we can't go back to the way things were, that there were things happening that people really valued about their micro connectivity, that we can value a sense that, you know, we needed to have a green, sustainable recovery, and that that values were becoming much more the fore in terms of social and even political discourse. And I just wondered what the panel thought about I mean, there are some things that people have mentioned about the positive aspects of, maybe unintended consequences of the COVID pandemic, is that, you know, the arrest rates have gone down. Actually, the criminal justice system can't cope with this pandemic, and it has to try and divert people away if it can. What do you think the chances are, though, of those kind of positive features actually translating into practice in the longer term? Because what I see also in the UK context is kind of very strong returning in certain contexts to more populist narratives, to more punitive narratives. It hasn't necessarily changed the political narrative in a way that I think there's a much more grassroots activism that's developing. So what do you think the prospects are for some of the more positive things that have happened in terms of criminal justice actually being sustained in the longer term? So Dan, can I come back to you then, just to address that to begin with, and then I'm going to bring in Stilici.
Yeah, I think that the answer is I don't think I'm being entirely just Pollyannish when I say that I think that these reductions in jail populations and the drivers of them will, you know, persist. The reason I say that is that it's certainly the case that the politics of the U.S., and as I can perceive it from a distance, many places around the world, this pandemic has fundamentally changed the political discourse in various ways that people, I won't repeat things that different people have said about persons of privilege and so with all the things that we've been hearing. And I do think that those are going to result in the case of the criminal justice system, ongoing changes in criminal justice policies. As an aside, I don't think it's going to have an enduring impact on crime rates, but that's a different topic. But
thank you. And Stilici, what do you think? Can I bring you in now?
It's okay. Okay. I think in the positive side, and now the government is in fear and panic, not only in pandemic, but also in economical poor. So, and the government investigated a lot of money in a few years, and the budget of the government is very in a critical situation. But now, on the positive side, and in he committed a crime or not is not so an important factor. So, and the people are poor. It is a standard to pay money and support someone. So I think on risk and offense and the differences between this offense or risk, and there is such I think such differences in reducing and weak. So when already in the 1980s and Ulrich Beck and stressed on and risk society, and so step by step, and risk is important society now. I think this and a pandemic accelerate this and risk society tendencies, I think. And it is on one side and a positive. So an offense or criminality is not so important. Risk is the standard to support or punish, I think.
Thank you very much. We're now, actually, we've been running out of time slightly, so I now would like to ask the panelists if they've got any final remarks to make in terms of what they said earlier, or any further reflections that they have about the future. I mean, what's been actually very nice to hear is actually some of the positivity that's come through the panel. But I think my own plenary address was actually deeply negative in many ways, but seeing this as this critical juncture. So Sandra, just go in the order that you were before. Sandra, would you like to say any further comments as a final set of remarks on the question?
Just reflecting on the potential for change. I'll just share, we're partway through an ESRC funded project looking at policing and court responses to domestic abuse during the pandemic and transitioning out of the pandemic. We're in early stages. The project doesn't finish till December 2021. But our early conversations with 25 different police forces in England and Wales suggest that some of the innovative practices they've been putting in place will already be benefiting domestic abuse victims. And they are practices that by far the majority of those police forces are going to sustain. I actually think that's a positive. I hope it carries on that way. I hope I can still say that in 18 months' time.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to mix it up. Dan, would you like to come in now?
I think I've said what I had to say. Thank you, but thank you for asking.
Thank you very much. Shinichi, would you like a final word?
This one. Next year, please come to Kyoto. Thank you.
Thank you. And Tara, would you like a final word?
No, thank you, Leslie. I just appreciate the opportunity to be here with this panel today, and I do hope we can be optimistic, but it's still recognise the struggles that many people are facing.
Yeah.
I do have one final word. I hope to make it to Kyoto this spring. I was supposed to go in May, and our trip got cancelled.
Thank you very much. Well, can I offer a very warm vote of thanks from all the members of the Society to you to come along and debate the issues, and also from different time zones with different technical issues. And I'm delighted actually that we've been able to welcome you to the Society's conference. So thank you very much. I think for me, I think it's interesting with Michelle's question about whether this is a kind of distorted lens or skews us away from thinking and distracts attention from other pressing social concerns. I think sometimes the COVID pandemic possibly is a kind of critical juncture. If you're a political scientist and you like historical institutionalism, they talk a lot about critical junctures setting out on new path dependencies. And I think that what the pandemic has done is actually exacerbates problems that were already there. And I think the opportunities that we see in terms of some of the good practice that might be coming out of this are things that we need to hold on to and sustain. And we need to be shouting about that, and we need to be demonstrating the evidence for some of these diversionary practices that might actually be very, very effective. So thank you very much. Tomorrow, there are a lot of panels going on, and these issues will be touched on a great deal by the scholars. Can I wish you all a very good conference tomorrow? I'm looking forward to listening to the panels. It's been a great pleasure chairing this session, and thank you again. And can I just say thank you and good night. So, bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. We will now stop the live streaming, and tomorrow everyone will access their panels, and we will meet again here for the closing ceremony at 7. Have a great evening, and thank you. Bye.
Goodbye.